All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the TFTuesday Podcast. My name is Zil. It's great to have you back here. Today has been quite the interesting one. I'll say it's been an interesting weekend. We've been having a bit of a heat wave here, and we've used a little bit of that time to cool off in the pool, but I would like the heat to go away, which it's not because, yay, global warming. Anyways, I'm here joined with my co-host, K-Libra. How are you doing, K-Libra?
Doing about as well as you probably are, having gotten up not too long ago. And but I'm doing okay, and at least it's good for the pool. The heat. I hate going when it's 70 degrees or something Fahrenheit, or like 20 C or something. It's not good enough for me. It's too cold.
You're the kind of person who's like, is it 80? If not, no, fuck that. Or 27 degrees. So
Like
we know how to do our
85, 90. My New York summers are supposed to be intense when I go to the beach. I went to Coney Island when it was like sweltering, and that's how I think you need to be at the beach.
Oh God. If it's 90 degrees or like 35 degrees, I just don't come out. I'm just like, I'm good. I'm gonna stay inside.
Cool.
So I mean, good on you, but
Cool.
I can't deal with it. Anyways, I'm really excited for the guests we have lined up today. But before we get to that, as always, just a friendly reminder that if you'd like to support us, you can join us on patreon.com/TFTuesdayPod. I feel like every time I do these, I don't know like what new to say, but I always try to mention the Discord now because we didn't before. The Discord is wonderful. You can join our wonderful Discord. We have so many wonderful things on the Discord, like me making a fool of myself, or Libra showing you sneak peeks of art, or me talking about pool toys. Like, there's just so many incredible things going on in our Discord. So if you'd like to support us, you can always do it that way. Always optional, but we appreciate it. And of course, do the like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff that I'm supposed to mention that I also usually forget. So, but yeah, that's it for the plug. That's out of the way. I'm really excited to introduce Sparks, who's here with us today. So Sparks, why don't you give us a bit of an introduction?
Yeah, hello everyone. Glad to be here. My name's Sparks. I'm 24 from Germany. I hope you can't hear it by my accent because I don't like German accent in English. But yeah, I've been creating TF art or transformation art since 2018, digitally and like online, showing what I do. And I have been drawing TF many years before that, probably like forever, basically. And I've been into TF my whole life. But yeah, like 2018, I joined the fandom. And since then, I've been creating transformation art, making commissions, and some personal pieces as well. And I constantly try to improve myself, challenge myself a little, and find out new things I like about the topic of the day, TF. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And honestly, I remember when you joined the fandom like actually quite distinctly, which is kind of funny. I don't always remember when like artists start out, but I do remember when you started out because I think you posted your first piece, which was like, I think it was a wyvern or a dragon TF. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I was like, oh, this is really good. And I was like, okay, this person must have been doing art for a time before this because this is not beginner stuff. And I was really excited. So I remember when you came onto the scene, and I think you've mentioned, you kind of found your way into the fandom at more of a young age. And so I'm curious as to like, how did you first interact with the community and how did that lead you to your current artistic position?
Well, if I have to go back at the time I joined, like the reason I joined the fandom actually was quite funny. Like I've been first just watching art in general, just like enjoying the art and being pretty quiet, not having an account or anything, open Fur Affinity on private tabs and just seeing what is out there. And yeah, then at some point I just remember drawing like with pen and paper. And at some point I got a graphics tablet and I started my apprenticeship as a graphic designer. So I did have the software to draw. And yeah, then I just like thought, yeah, why not? I made a drawing and I was like, hey, I could make this digital, just like, let's try it out. And then there I was, finished the piece, that Dragon TF you were talking about. And then I was like, hey, it would be a pity if I just kept this to myself. So I just opened up the first site that came to my mind, which was Fur Affinity, and I just posted it and was like, here, have it. And yeah, I got good reactions to that ever since, and like very quickly, just like requests for commissions just streamed in, and I was like, guys, I just started out. I don't know what I'm doing. And yeah, I just rolled with it, and I've met so many nice people ever since. So yeah, I really enjoyed the time, and I still enjoy it to this day.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I remember as soon as it came in, I was like, instant watch, and I was like, does this person take commission? So, I completely understand where they were coming from. Because again, like you said, like you'd had at least done a lot of work on pen and paper first, and it was clear that, you had a good grasp of anatomy and you knew what made a good TF piece, in my opinion. So, I think that made a lot of sense to me. I'm curious then, obviously you mentioned that you've also done like an apprenticeship to be like a professional media designer. So has your experience working in media influenced how you approach furry art at all?
It did. I wouldn't say, especially in the beginning, like for the better, because I've been working at a company that does drawings, animated characters, and the way they approached drawing those was, slowing me down in my art process. Actually, like they drew it by hand with pen and paper, and then scanned it and then digitalized it. And this was the only way I knew how to do this. So I just did that. It slowed down my art a lot. But yeah, like in the end, as I finished my apprenticeship, as I just worked as a regular graphic designer in many companies already, I have found out like how to use the program I'm drawing with. I'm drawing with Photoshop, how to use it for my advantage, how to unfold its full potential, and just to keep on top with new techniques and everything. And yeah, that is definitely what influenced my art, just like the technical approach on how to do it, but not as much like composition wise, just maybe some random thoughts coming to my head, but nothing from my job.
Gotcha. No, that's really cool. I mean, it's disheartening to hear that it slowed you down a bit, but I'm glad that obviously you've made your way back to the place that you want to be in now. So I will say, when I was trying to learn how to draw, I was also taught that way of like, oh, you scan it, you draw it on pen and paper first and then you scan it. So yeah, that probably didn't help me either. But anyways, I feel you is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's also like a pain. Just like right now, I really don't like to draw like with a pen anymore, just because there's nothing existing like a Command C on your paper. So this is just horrible. Like, and it makes so much dirt like all around the desk, like from your eraser. Everything is just like full. Your hand gets dirty from the pencil. No, I'm glad I'm a digital artist now, to be honest.
I'm of two minds about that sort of thing, where I kind of miss the mess of traditional art sometimes, or when I'm doing it, sometimes I'll, see a bit of the graphite on my hand, and I don't know, it just feels nice, like I've been doing something. And also just, I was taught by an art professor in one class who really kind of embraced the mess in art. I really liked him. He was pretty eccentric. And, he said things like, never fully clean up your arts. The mess that you leave behind shows the journey, the steps of the journey you took to get to where your piece is and stuff like that. And I always found that pretty cool to think about. And, if you got your hands dirty, if you had stuff around you, it's just like, yeah, I've been going places with this. And that's good. And I can also relate to just the freedom of digital art, because one of the things that I like about digital art so much is I'm not going to run out of a color or a material or anything like that. That's what really gets me about traditional art. I always feel like I'm going to be wasting it, which is not a great state of mind to have if you want to be making anything on paper or any kind of canvas or anything. But it's something that I haven't fully gotten over ever.
No, I get that. I do paint traditionally, like with oil paint, and I think I still have somewhere in the back of my room, I think 160 Copic markers, which I haven't used for years, which is pretty sad. But I try to get back into that as well. But like making a mess aspect, I love how that professor of yours had their viewpoint on it, but I still have a problem with making a mess while doing art. So yeah, I'm pretty clean when it comes to that.
I get it. It's funny because I can look at your art and it's like the most recent submission you have is very clean with like a sort of grainy filter, which gives it, a really nice look. I always appreciate a bit of grit. It's the Griffin one, or rather
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Hippogriff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. You got really incredibly clean lines, and you got pretty smooth coloring, all that sort of stuff. But you got other ones like the one that's called Heavy Tail Action. That one, I really love that sort of style. I feel like clean work is a little. It's like the goal for so many artists, especially online now. They want the crispest lines, and and I see people go like over and over and over, and that something that I really hated because I tried to do that for a while and I feel like I never got very good at it. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I see the value in your work too, especially when you decide to take a more painterly approach. Because like, okay, it's like the dick portraits. The dick portraits you seem to go for like painterly, and then for like other ones you seem to go like really clean. And I don't really know if that's like a difference between how you're feeling versus what you think needs to be done. But like, I don't know. Yeah, I just noticed that sort of thing. I don't know how you go about making the choice for that sometimes.
Well, actually, it's pretty simple. It's simple, basic laziness. Yeah, like for commissions and everything, I try to give the best quality to the client. So this is why I push myself to make those clean lines, good looking artworks that you could possibly also print out, hang up somewhere if you like to do that. And like mostly for personal art pieces, I just want to get the idea that suddenly pops into my brain just to be visualized somehow. So I just skip the whole line art process and just go with the coloring. And yeah, those artworks are finished a lot faster, of course, but also I think they're a lot more lively, as you said. This is something I've noticed myself as well, and I actually am thinking about making changes in my like portfolio and what I offer for clients. Yeah, that's basically how I decide which art style I want to use. Just simple laziness. Should I take time for that, or just do I want it visualized very quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wouldn't want people to think that you're lazy, because if anybody looked at that work and said, "Oh, they're slacking," I think that'd be really fucked up to say.
Yeah, your definition of lazy is definitely like, I mean, the artwork speaks for itself. It's fantastic. So yeah, I agree with Libra. It's like if anyone saw that and was like, oh yeah, he's getting lazy now. It's like, no, I don't think anyone would ever think that.
Yeah, don't come calling. Don't commission me. Go away.
No, but it's not what I think people might think, but it's more like a me thing.
Yeah.
Because there is just a certain amount of energy I have for a drawing session, and sometimes I just want it finished, and sometimes I just want to have a certain part on it done. And
Yeah, without getting too much into it, I just want to reaffirm that because there's a video online about a guy who spent 13 years on a single project of this lovingly made graphic novel, and they were like, I'm super proud of this. I put my heart and soul and everything into it. I went so many places. I will never do that again. I will never want to do anything like that again. And I have learned the value of cutting corners because I only have so much time and there's other shit I want to do. So here's what not to do that I did for this.
yeah, that's actually why I decided to adapt this more rough drawing style for the comics I do. Just because if I really wanted to do the cell shading style in the comics that I have on my like single image commissions, I would probably drawing on my first comic to this day, and I would be mentally drained by now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's good that you have like that kind of diversity with the styles that have kind of adapted to, the output you're aiming for, like like having like one style for more of your personal stuff, having that obviously sketchier kind of approach with the comics, and then having like the cleaner lines for some of the single pieces. I think it looks well. And like one of the things that strikes me when you look at your gallery is that you have this variety of styles, which I think a lot of people look at that and they see it as like diversity and skill, and definitely not any sign of laziness. I would be remiss not to mention, of course, my personal favorite, which is the commission that I got from you, the Unleashing the Inner Fire piece. It's very good. You should check it out. It has a very good dragon deck. But yeah, like I think like when I look at a piece like that, I'm like, that's a very distinct clean lines, etc. And that works for that. But you can also have other styles for other pieces. And I think that that's good too. So
yeah, I've been thinking to offer like this rough style for regular commissions as well, just because I noticed how like the personal art pieces with their style get accepted and how they just like seem to attract likes on social media like crazy. And I was like, hey, people like this. Why don't I offer this? Because if you enjoy it, then you should have it.
yeah, exactly. Well, I'm curious then, because obviously one of the focuses that you have in a lot of your pieces is that kind of mid TF stage. And I mean, obviously lots of TF artists do mid TF. That's not new, but I noticed like in particular, you had like a very high amount of it, and not just in commissions, like in with your personal stuff as well. So I was curious, is there something like in particular that draws you to that snapshot in between changes?
In itself, what attracts me to transformation in general is just like the feeling and the process itself. Like when I'm drawing TF, it's more like I'm thinking about how would I feel in this situation? How would the body feel? And I want to make those feelings, those sensations as vivid as possible. So that's why I try to capture like a mid TF. And I do push myself to make a perfect mid TF at some points. Sometimes I just get overexcited, TF apart a bit too much, but yeah, it's like the process itself. I always think about, people wish to be their sonas at some point. And to get there, there's a process behind it, which is the transformation. You can't get past that, except there's just a big poof and suddenly you're your sona, and that's not how it goes. And yeah, that's why I always think mid TF is like the perfect snapshot between humanity and being what you're transforming into.
I can appreciate that a lot. It's where my mind ends up going to, because when I was little and I started to think about this stuff and wanted to see more of it, it was always the parts in between that the camera would focus on that I constantly wanted to go back to, because it was so interesting. And I just started to think, well, what about like these and what about these? Which is why, like for instance, I never could really stick to werewolves. I saw like werewolves like one time, and I'm like, that's cool. But then there's also everything else, and I can't seem to find anything else. And it's just great to try to envision how anything else would work.
Yeah, it's also like a thing about the physique of the body. Like transformation is just like sadly purely fictional, but you have as an artist also the power to like display how this could work if it actually happened. So just like thinking about, okay, how would, for example, a hand just shift into a paw? How would that look like? How would that work? What would start first? That is the part that makes transformation art so interesting for me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of why I end up just falling into the same sort of thing, a mid shot. What's tough for me, because it's not always, I mean, I begun to appreciate like a tiny bit more in some cases, but when somebody's said like, oh, I want a step where they're like 90% finished, and I think, well, I mean, what's left to do,
Yeah, right. Right. That's the point.
Yeah, might as well just actually go all the way from there. But what can I say?
I mean, I will say in defense of 90% shot people, I think one of the attractions to that is it's like you're almost there and you can basically look at it and be like, yeah, okay, that's like basically the final form. But there's like a little bit of TF still like finishing up there. And so when you look at it, you can't mistake it as like it's just some like random like furry picture. It's like, there's like an element of this is part of like a TF, because there's just that little, amount of humanity that's still like fading away. So
you can do that, and I've seen that done very well, but that took me a little while to think of the interesting part of that. That's not easy. That is
it's
really, really difficult.
Yeah, it is.
And I think people don't quite realize what that means for some artists, but that's speaking for myself. Also, it depends on how interested the person is in the end result, because, I don't know. Like, Sparks, do you feel very invested in the end results, or are you more like me where like, yeah, it's like the middle part that's really the best parts still.
Yeah, definitely the latter. Like the mid part is just like the most amazing thing there can be. Just like being in the process. Also, I am personally more interested in like the 30% shift, maybe.
Yeah.
Like
Ah.
when it's just beginning to start, you notice the changes happening, there's something wrong with the body that you've been living in for all your life, and somehow it changes rapidly. And just this feeling is pretty exciting itself. And I love to display that in art, and I just love to look at it in art. Also, like the 90% shifts are very interesting as well, because they have to be done right. Because, like you said, Zil, it is pretty hard to differentiate. Is it like a regular furry art, or is it really TF art? And it has to be done well. And thankfully, a lot of artists really do that quite well. But sometimes, like if you have these little thumbnails on of A and you just scroll past, sometimes you just don't notice. And that is a bit of a shame, because there's so much great art out there that you just miss because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, building on that a little bit, I'm curious, you've talked about how you like, for example, the kind of 30% of the way along. Are there any other like specific tropes you like to come back to for the subjects of your TF work? Like, are there any that you just keep coming back to that you love to see in a TF setting?
Well, when it comes to that, like what I love about TF the most, what part I love the most is just like the feet and legs changing, especially to GTT grade stance, because I don't know, I've just had a fascination for it my whole life. I can't explain it. I just love how that expresses. I could go into various details what might be behind that psychologically, but in the end, I don't know, I just love it. So I really love just like including the poor TF in my pieces as much as possible. Sometimes I also say, no, Sparks, don't do that. It's better for the picture if you don't, but there's a personal love for it that I can't deny.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's part of the freedom that you have anyway. You can express the things you like.
Yeah.
I see the patterns and all the stuff that I do, and instead of feeling self-conscious about it, it's really good to just be okay with it, especially if you're making it for yourself. What else do you really need to do?
Yeah, you just have to be fine with what you're drawing, and you have to like it. And even if you say, oh, this drawing sucks, I am so bad, like if the idea gets over, then everything is done well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And no matter how messy quotations it may seem to be, the expression is really the most important part. And it can even feel validating, especially if people seem to cling on to it. It's the painful thing about sharing your work online, where you can see numbers of things. And I have noticed that there are pieces where either I put an excruciating amount of effort into it, will get a lot of positive attention, or I can do something in about an hour or two and it will get a lot of attention. But never quite anything in the middle, even if it looks good, even if it's quite nice. And yeah, rather than agonizing over whether or not it's good enough, or if it's something you should or shouldn't be doing, it's really good when you're just doing it as much as you want. When you feel it's enough, it's enough.
Yeah. Like that's the thing. I try to not look at likes or favorites or whatever there is out there. I love more like interactions with my artwork, like nice comments and everything. That encourages me more than just a number next to it, because words say much more than numbers. And yeah, I try to focus on that. And even if I put a lot of effort into things, I really want them to be just like good for me. And if I put it out there, if there's one person out there that enjoys the work I posted online, then that's enough.
Yeah,
that is a very balanced way of looking at it, in my opinion. And I struggle to even get to there myself. So I commend you for having that mindset. I will at least say, I think I've liked every single piece of work you've put out. So mission accomplished.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking back even to just like your earliest submissions, you were wondering, oh, I just got here, I don't know what I'm doing. Well, it really looked like you did.
Yeah, like he was putting out bangers.
There's a secret to it. I still don't know what I'm doing to this day. I just happen
Apparently,
all of us.
nobody
to
does.
not know and just do well somehow. But like you just mentioned, going back in my gallery, and I actually did that a few weeks ago, and I was just like, wow, I really see the difference how I progressed. And first, like I was thinking, oh yeah, I didn't progress at all. But sometimes when you have enough submissions to look back on, you can really see on small things you improved on. And I got recently very proud of that.
Yeah,
Oh, good.
as you should
Very
be.
good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you should be. And, one of the things I noticed, especially in your more recent stuff, but also like this is kind of a through line, I think, through most of your work. A lot of your art focuses on like solo transformation and often in like kind of private spaces. And so I was curious as to what the thought process was behind focusing on those kinds of scenarios, because it's very prevalent in your stuff.
Yeah, I'm fascinated you noticed that actually. Like mostly, actually, since my work is mostly commissions, clients just actually ask for it. But also, it is that TF for me is just a very intimate topic. So I am not as comfortable to draw people sharing that or having something in public. Just for me, those moments of self-exploring, self-realization and fulfillment just spark that little bit of joy. And I think it's a bit different if you share it or just are in public or anywhere else. Just like that little bubble of privacy, just to experience everything just for yourself, only you and the change. That is what actually, is hits the spot for me.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the intimacy is kind of spoiled a little bit if there's at least one other person involved?
Yeah, it is. Like it can be a very intimate moment as well, but it's not the same thing. Like being alone is also putting you in a very helpless situation, I'd say. So you're all on your own. Those changes are happening to you. You don't know what to do. You're just on your own with that change. And that is pretty exciting actually for me. And I enjoy that feeling a little. That little bit of helplessness, not too dangerously, but it hits the certain oomph in the artwork. Yeah.
No, I can see that, and I can agree with it. I feel pretty much the same way you do about it, and it's hard to envision any. It's usually hard to envision anything other than like maybe one other person in the space, or I guess what I should say is that's how I would want it too, for the most part. Either them just kind of indulging in the sheer sensation of it all, the experience, or just making it so that if there's somebody else in there, it's like very, very special, because it's also a very vulnerable thing.
Yeah. That I think that sums it up pretty well. That word, vulnerable feeling.
Because even if you're like, oh, you're turning into something big and powerful, you're not fully in control of yourself in some scenarios. You could be, because this can be whatever you want. But with what I like to see, I can imagine you're there, you're kind of overwhelmed by what your body wants and where it needs to get to, more than being able to just do anything, to just move around. And that's why I think that, if it's going to be happening, I like it being by yourself or with somebody else. And if you're someone else, you could do other fun things too.
Yeah. Also, I think if there's somebody else in the room while you're changing, it adds a certain distraction to it, I'd say, because you're starting to think like you're lying there changing into whatever you like, and there's someone else there. And at least my overthinking head sometimes thinks, oh my God, what are they thinking? What could happen? And how do I interact? And that little moment of helplessness, not knowing what to do, having another person in the room with you or multiple persons is putting something into the spark of this TF that is unnecessary for me, actually.
It's interesting because you usually, like, when you think about the word intimacy, it's defined as like, between two people, but it's clear that like the intimacy that you're talking about here is like, the closeness with oneself and almost like, the intimacy between yourself and the changes. I guess then, you kind of just described if someone else is there, it's almost like a distraction. There's almost like an anxiety of like, how do I balance my focus on the changes with dealing with this other person, be it if they're changing or otherwise. And so I'm curious, do you feel like with solo TF, you kind of allow the subject to better understand themselves, even outside of the context of their transformation?
Let's see. I think all of this results just like out of me being very insecure about this side of myself, just like in my private life in general. I haven't talked to many people about it, except for the people I meet online. So yeah, I'm pretty shy about that. And that I think reflects in my art as well. And thinking about the nights, I'm sure someone in the audience, maybe all of them, have had the feeling like lying awake at night in bed, having that little tingle in one of your limbs that suddenly spreads and being like, is this finally it? And that little excitement, yeah, it's that moment you've been longing for to experience yourself for who knows what time. And I think, yeah, like I said before, it's more of a distraction to have that moment not fully to yourself to enjoy it. I still think like public TFs and intimate TFs with other people are a good thing. I like drawing them as well. Like you've probably seen my work.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's not a big problem for me. Just like for the private matter, like for me and personally, I do enjoy my TF art more private and more intimate to myself, and it's that self-fulfillment basically of becoming what you want to be.
Yeah. I want to say, I think that's really perceptive of you to have like made the link between like your love of like solo stuff and maybe like being more private, like, in real life and such. I feel like that's a path that a lot of people do take. And I, just thinking about what you just said in the context of myself, I definitely grew to love TFs with another person only after I started being a lot more open. Like before that, I was very much like, I was only into just the solo stuff. And I guess I hadn't really thought about it in that way. So it's very perceptive of you to say that, because I hadn't frankly really made that connection, but it makes a lot of sense. If you feel closed off from sharing this with other people in real life, it stands to reason that that would then be reflected in some of the interests you have in art. And I mean, frankly, obviously anyone can be interested in solo TF or with other people, regardless of what stage of openness they are in their lives. But it's interesting to kind of make that connection, because that does make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, the introspection on that I think is valuable, because this is a lot about exploration and expression. Expression most of the time is what I think happens in arts. And for me, if I'm doing something with somebody else, it's a matter of desire. I want to see if I'm looking at somebody's intimate moments, it's like I want to feel special. So I want to see those vulnerable moments. And if I draw it with someone else, I want to be a part of that. So, I mean, yeah, if you're feeling insecure about it, I hope that as you're expressing, that you're also that you're still going on your own kind of journey, and that you don't just resign to that. I think that if after like several years you find that it's actually something you love rather than something you're settling on due to something else, then that's fine. But yeah, I see the value in wanting it to be that way, because again, I agree with you about that vulnerability and really just kind of being there with yourself to soak it all in, not have any distractions. I think that's a great idea. That's why I like picturing masturbation too. It's just like pure self-indulgence.
Oh, yeah.
And especially if it's someone else, kind of lady that I would find attractive, is like, hey, I'd love to get in on that too.
Yeah, like the sharing that moment, if like both are into it, is something very special. Like I think having this moment when your minds just like connect on that feeling, I think this can be very overwhelming, but I haven't had that feeling, not like referring to relationships or anything, but
Yeah.
I don't find special interest in that for now. That might change. I don't know. I'm weird, so who knows what happens.
Well, we're all learning ourselves, like I feel like self-discovery is just a constant journey. And sometimes as time goes on, you learn new things about yourself. And sometimes those things that you learned, at a younger age are solidified and, further validated. So I feel like, as fans of transformation, I always implore us to be open to changes in our real lives. But I don't think that's a problem you have. I think it's just something that's always a good reminder. Sorry, go ahead, Libra.
No, just agreeing with you. It
Yeah.
was always really weird to me when people would just kind of like want to stay in a very particular way, in a very particular state, with a very specific kind of personality, and they're like, yes, I love transformation. Fucking nah. It bothers me. And hey, as far as maybe you feeling like it's not interested for you to like be with anybody, that's completely fine for so many reasons. But most of all, like speaking for myself, I remember there was a very long time where I thought I'd never be with anybody who would want me. So that was like part of like my insecurity. There's like layers of stuff to really explore and just see where you're at with that. But hey, in the meantime, it does seem like you're having a lot of fun, which is also really good.
It is a lot of fun, to be honest. So to get back to that topic, funny fact on the side, I had that thought of, oh, nobody wants to be with me when they find out I feel like this. I like TF, and maybe I'm a furry as well. Like, there's a whole big group of people in my region who just like dislike furries. So I'm pretty insecure about that and pretty careful about that. But funnily enough, my boyfriend, who isn't a furry, I just came out to him one day and he was like, well, that's cool. Count me in.
Oh, that's great.
So the world is full of surprises, and that was one of them.
Yep, I keep saying it, that the fear of coming out about stuff like this to people you're supposed to be close to, you'll find that it's not something to really be scared of. Most people who don't like it aren't going to go into this huge production about shaming you and making fun of you and destroying your reputation and everything like that. Most of the time, they're either like, oh, huh, that's okay, that's fine, that's interesting, I guess. Or they'll be accepting. They'll be like, "Oh, cool! I'm glad to know that about you." More often than not, if you have somebody who really cares about you, you'll find that they're actually going to feel pretty good about you confiding in them about that sort of thing. At least that's how I feel. And then like with your case, your boyfriend's, you tell your boyfriend about it, and it's like, oh yeah, let me try it, and that happens. That happens more often than you think it would.
It does.
Yeah, so that was a pretty interesting experience for me, and I love it to this day, actually.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
No, that's
So-
great.
So always remember that. It's because even with your boyfriend, it wouldn't necessarily be an isolated incident either. You'd be surprised if you just make like a few friends, or maybe you have other people, like other artists. Oh, maybe they're not into TF or something like that. Maybe you get to know them. After a little while, you're kind of like, hey, this is the other kind of stuff that I like to make, laying out a little context, but here's the other kind of stuff. And maybe like, oh, you know what? I'm not into like the dick portraits, but everything else that you do is really cool. And then before you know it, they'll try something and you'll be like, oh shit, you too now.
Yeah. And I'll also say, obviously you mentioned that the area where you are is not necessarily very furry friendly. And that kind of comment reminded me of a time in my life where I was definitely felt very alone on that front. And in particular, back when I was in university, I was for various reasons, I was somewhat loud about it when no one else around me was doing so. I wore a tail around on campus. I still do to this day, like in public. I just wear tails. I love tails. And it's funny, especially back in that time, it was, well, the internet was a certain way back in the early 10s, and it was not very friendly to furries. But one thing that always sticks out in my mind, and I think about when I think about that, is that me going around and doing my stuff, I actually ended up getting someone else to start doing that too. And that was not a reaction that I had ever imagined in my wildest dream. It was very much a self-expression type thing for me, and not really I was obviously worried about what other people thought of me, but it wasn't I'm expressing this so that other people will express it back to me. But I somehow generated that reaction. And so now, this is in the context of living in Toronto. I live very close to the village. So, I get generally very positive reactions these days anyways. And, the times have changed a little bit, but sometimes I guess what I'm trying to say, you get positive reactions from people that you never even realized. And I'm not saying to, go out and do that yourself, but I think that sometimes we magnify in our minds the negativity that we see online and the negativity that we sometimes see from other people. And sometimes the world can actually be a slightly friendlier place than we imagine. But, that's your mileage may vary kind of comment. So
online experience is actually a very small sample of people. You don't realize that because yes, millions of people, but there are actually way more than millions of people. And a lot of the people that are interacting on the internet is even smaller than that. It's not reasonable. I don't want to go on this for too long, but one more example is showing my girlfriend, one of my girlfriends. I showed her mom one of the commissions that I was doing. And I'm just like, let me see how she feels about this. And her reaction was just like, that is so fucking cool. I can't believe you're able to make this. Do you know how impressive it is that you can make things like this? You should be very proud of this. It is so interesting. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah, I think we often underestimate what art in general can do to people, and also how many people think about us, because we thought about our art, our hobbies, of something very private. At least for me, it is very private, as you know. But sometimes people can really surprise you, and it's not only you thinking about it, and it might be in other people as well. So yeah, I just love the surprises that life sometimes gives.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. I'm just pleased about that.
Yeah. I want to ask one more question actually about the solo TF stuff. So I know we've talked a little bit about this at the edges, but obviously having someone transform in public kind of shatters that sense of intimacy that we've been talking about. And I'm curious if you what would you say is being detracted from a transformation when it is in like a public setting? Like, do you feel like it lessens the impact on the subject because of that distraction stuff we were talking about? Or do you also feel like there's almost like a violation or like humiliation angle that just isn't really of interest of you there?
I think that's about right. There is some level of humiliation, and and also the distraction I mentioned before. Since I said it's a very private moment to transform, at least for me, and that is suddenly taken, and especially in public scenarios, it's kind of tinted by prying eyes and the humiliation you get from it. And that, for me at least, takes away the joyful experience that somehow comes with it. And I often think about what happens next once you finish the transformation. Like, you're there, being what you are, and in the middle of a crowded group of people, and what then? Just run away, or like all these feelings, you can't just stay exhausted or just like happily explore your body, what just happened with it. You just have to think about, oh god, how am I gonna get out of this? And thought is this is why personally I don't like public TFs that much. But yeah, as you see, I still draw them and I still enjoy drawing them. So there's no problem with that. But just for me, at least, that's a thought that makes me a bit uncomfortable, maybe sometimes.
Well, it's about an idealized scenario. If you were to like realistically chart out a lot of things, this stuff gets less and less fun. Even putting aside, how would this really work? What would happen to your body? Even the logistics of turning into anything else almost anywhere is, would be a huge fucking disaster. Where's your room specifically designed to like take all the sheddings of your humanity and stuff like that? Do you have a floor that's like stainless and easy to clean off? like you could get into that and it would be way less fun. And I am completely okay with idealizing a situation. I don't see why not. I do see that there have been like a few people I talked to who just kind of shit a little bit on like, oh, it's wish fulfillment. I think I know where they're coming from because sometimes it can come off as, I don't know, a little overbearing. You know, there are some people who will do the wish fulfillment thing and then just kind of like put it on blast in your fucking face, you know, when you see it, and you could just kind of be like, yeah, I know you want this. All right. But generally speaking, it's not to be mistaken for everybody else wanting to really express their desires or get what they want, because this stuff is hard enough to make, never mind kind of embrace, not kind of, just actually embracing it. Because embracing this, when I started out, I'm just like, holy shit, there's something wrong with me, right? There's something wrong with me, right? I mean, I don't think so anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the joyful aspect, because that was kind of actually the next thing I wanted to talk about. And ironically, our patrons voted for us to talk about Wholesome TF2. And so it plays really nicely into this kind of wholesome, enthusiastic kind of like Ouroboros I've blended together. So, you know, you mentioned that you really like are interested in those kinds of happy, wholesome, enthusiastic kind of TFs. I'm curious if you could expand a little bit on why you really enjoy like when the subject is embracing the TF with excitement. Because I mean, we've kind of talked about that in shades already, like up to this point, but if you could like almost like summarize it, what would you like crystallize it as in terms of like that pure like interest that you have in it?
I think it's like, as we have already discussed, this fulfillment of a wish that you've probably longed for quite some time. Also, like, this would be a wish that is physically just impossible, and it suddenly becomes possible. It is happening to you right now. Your hands are shifting into claws. You're growing whatever you want to be, and I think it's a very overwhelming feeling. And especially like, since, at least for me, since you've been wishing for this to happen to you for basically your entire life, just to be something else and go through this process, it can be quite exciting. And I often, just as a fun fact on the side, I often prefer not to give any certain triggers to a TF, just like in private settings for me, because I actually, as a trigger, quote, I'd actually prefer it to be just like a wishing way too hard for it to happen, and then it suddenly happens, just like out of nowhere, unexplained, just it suddenly happens. You have to live with it and then enjoy it. And if there is something you desire the most in this world and it suddenly happens, defying all laws of nature, it's just amazing in my head. And that's what about sums it up, I hope.
No, that's great.
I was going to give you a very, I don't know, I guess it's spicy. Triggers are overrated.
Yeah.
And overvalued. They really are. It's like, what's the trigger? What's the trigger? What's the trigger? Who fucking cares? What about what you're seeing in front of you? Is that really not enough? Can you not like add your own like speculation to it? What's the trigger? What's the story behind it? How did it get there? What happens after? Holy fucking shit. You have space for your imagination. That's part of like the communication of art. Communicate.
I first want to say I think that's beautiful and very wholesome, and I love that concept of like wishing too hard and then it happens. I'm going to turn back for a moment. As someone who does really like triggers, I can understand where you're coming from when you say they're overrated, but I mean, part of the communication of a transformation is also like helping the audience understand the story of what's happening. So I think triggers do have a pretty like strong basis there, but I do also understand where you're coming from, Sparks, in the sense of like you want to leave it almost open to artistic interpretation, and you have your own kind of like thought process of like, it's because, you know, you're wishing so hard that you get to have the thing that you always wanted, which I think is cool. So
yeah, like I'm torn between, like, for me personally, it's the like leaving out the trigger because it's the process of the transformation I'm interested in. But like for some works, I actually do enjoy looking for a trigger. Like okay, spoilers, I'm currently drawing on another comic, and I wanted to really go in depth with the story, figure out some basic storytelling and explaining at least a little bit to the audience. And then I was like, okay, what could be the trigger? And when it comes to triggers, I am pretty, picky. Let's say it like that.
Oh, okay.
Because some triggers for me are not enough or too easy. Maybe just like, oh yeah, let's make it magic, swoosh, and that's in my mind sometimes too easy, and maybe also some triggers are too far-fetched, and I wanted, of course, we're talking about sadly the physical impossible, but I wanted to be somewhat graspable for the viewer, just to understand or have a relation to it for themselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. I'm curious then when we talk about, obviously the enthusiastic element of the changes, often, pleasant surprise is often an emotion associated with these kinds of TFs. How do you feel surprise should be handled when it comes to these sorts of like wholesome or enthusiastic scenarios?
Like, I think when it comes to surprise itself, I think it should be a progression. Like, at first you're like taken by surprise, didn't really think about it. I think it should be a progression of surprise. Like, first you're completely taken by surprise, not expecting it at all. And then it happens, maybe you get a little scared about it, not knowing what to do. Because your body just suddenly changes completely. And after that, once you have a realization what is actually happening and starting to accept it, then kicks in the joy and the just like complete excitement about it. That's like what I would consider a perfect TF progression.
No, that's fantastic.
I'm happy about this because a lot of work that I end up seeing is it's either between like mindless self-indulgence and kind of torment, torment punishment. I think that's one of the things that I can appreciate about your work is that there's a lot of sincere enjoyment for the subject. Even in the commissions that you do, I think that your desires show through pretty well. So it's very easy to look at your work, and whether or not it's for me, I look at it and I think, yeah, there's a good time there, and I think that's really cool. And I like looking at your work in part because of that.
Thank you. No, I think like regarding my work, I really focused on having even commissions appeal to me. So I would never draw a commission that I'm not fully into, I'm not satisfied with. I can't really relate to it. So that is some of my like quality demands for myself. And yeah, that's why I try to put this in every artwork.
Yeah. No,
It
I
shows.
agree. Yeah, I agree with Libra. It definitely shows. And I think that it's so interesting to see, especially I think in your personal pieces like that euphoria that gets pulled into the picture, be it, the progression that you outlined of having like a little bit of like surprise, a little bit of concern, and then that kind of melts away into being like excited about the changes. Like that's such a cool progression, and I feel like that really resonates with people. And to Libra's point, I feel like sometimes that's not even the most common thing of what's depicted, like the kind of polar angles of like, oh my gosh, this is complete like torture porn versus, oh, I'm just like mindlessly jerking off or something. Like you obviously are leaning more towards the happy angle, but like there is a point there almost on the spectrum is what I'm trying to say, that I think you try to aim towards, that I feel like a lot of people do enjoy it and it doesn't always get put out there into the ether. I feel like a lot more of those pieces fall onto that like dichotomy, and I'm not trying to like yuck anyone's yum. Obviously, if that's what you're into, that's what you're into, and that's fine. But I think it's really cool from the perspective of like, I think Wholesome TF doesn't always get put out there because for whatever reason, people find it like less interesting thematically, which I think they're wrong about. And I think it's really cool to see how you portray that in your stuff.
I think another thing, because obviously you have a lot of porn there, but like being wholesome doesn't mean for something to not be pornographic.
Yeah, totally.
There is actually a wholesome way to enjoy sex and anything remotely sexual. I think it's good if people listen to you on this, because then they can get a better understanding of exactly how this goes. Because I like how you vocalized your feelings on it. and even how, like, I haven't fully articulated some of this stuff, so now I'm going to be thinking about more of it too.
When it comes like to TF in general, like I'm not only for like the wholesome TF parts. There is very appealing things in TFs, like the typical werewolf TF that is somehow also painful. At that point, there are certain aspects I really like about it, or even other parts like a bit of humiliation. It's okay for me, and if people like more of that or more of that, that's perfectly fine. You like what you like, and it's good that you like it. But what did I want to say? I just drifted off completely.
I think you were just crystallizing why you like the wholesome TF in your own way.
Yeah. Like the wholesome part is just like for me a big thing in the end. Like I already explained, it's just self-fulfillment. But there are so many facets and parts about TF that make it interesting that I can't say I only like wholesome TF, because whatever setting you have.
If I give you the impression that's all you're about, then, you know, I apologize. That's not the...
No, not at all. Not at all. Don't apologize, please. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Okay,
but
making sure.
Yeah, but I think one of the cool things as well with, like, when we talk about wholesome and enthusiastic TFs, like, and you kind of described this, I think, earlier, you know, there's that almost like validation brought about by the TF and like the excitement of becoming something new, something maybe you've wished you've always had. So I'm curious then, if we think about specifically like a transformation into someone's sona, how do you feel about those situations where the internalized identity being brought outwards is like validating to someone and is like a really key component of it?
I think like that transformation, that change, is a very big desire for oneself. Like I already said, it's a wish you've had for quite some time, and since that fulfillment is being brought outward, it really fuels the excitement for me. But in the end, I think also it doesn't have to be like the sona to be brought out, but in the end, just what we identify as, or just like what we like. And yeah, that's basically it. Just like having the change happen to you is more exciting to me than having that validation of being the sona you are. You probably know I consider myself more of a shapeshifter than as a particular species. Yeah, I think the process is the most fun about it.
Well, then I'm curious, are there like any specific changes that could happen to you that wouldn't fall into like wholesome? Like, would any TF suffice, or does it have to be more like tied to like specific kind of species that you have found more interest in over time?
I mean, I'd be excited about any TF, to be honest. But yeah, there are some sorts and species that I'd be more excited about. Like I do love wolves, I love dragons, I love deer, I love sharks, I love tigers, I love lions, I like a lot, and every species has like a certain thing about it that makes it so unique and interesting. But any TF would be completely fine for me, anything. But of course, some of my favorite species would like fuel the enthusiasm a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, obviously we all have our preferences on specific species, but I find it interesting that you could find that kind of wholesome enthusiasm in so many different species. And obviously that speaks a little bit to the shapeshifter element. And maybe I can pick on that a little bit, actually, because, you know, I know that you do have 2 public-facing sonas, but you've spoken about, you know, most conclusively identifying as being a shapeshifter with no real defined form. So I was curious if you could elaborate on that. Like, have you simply never felt any particular form could properly express who you are, or is there something else going on there?
Yeah, it's called being slow. I basically have been working on a shape-shifting character for myself. I do still express myself like in the fandom as Sparks, or you, who is my dragon. And I do plan on adding a few more sonas to it. But since I am pretty slow with drawing all that and still figuring out how the pieces work together, it's hasn't been communicated quite yet and quite properly. Maybe I can elaborate a little bit, because I actually thought a lot about how could I express myself as a shapeshifter in the fandom, so I
Right.
came up with a human-based character called Nate. I think you've seen some drawings of him. I think I
Yeah.
posted one on Twitter at some point, being like, "This is the closest you'll ever get to a face reveal."
Yeah. I remember seeing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is of course a very ideal depiction of also what I would want to look like as a human, because I still think humans are attractive as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I thought, okay, how could we make this interesting? And I came up with the concept of him being able to shapeshift into anything he wants, any body part he likes, being very fluid with it.
Right.
But with that comes, the more he changes into one form, the more this form gets a mind of its own, until there are like these. I can say maybe multiple personalities living in one body, multiple species living in one body, and maybe also in some awkward situations take control and just like shift the body completely. And what I put behind that is that Sparks the wolf and you the dragon are the first species that have manifested innate. So these are just like two personas who trust each other, and who Nate is very trusting with, because they do harmonize at some point. Because I think I am also working on a proper reference sheet for all that. I've written down some stuff for it, but it's not quite ready yet. I will communicate it when it's done. But there is also the possibility that some species might manifest out of nowhere. So yeah, I think I also like the internal conflict with it. And yeah, I'll see where this brings me. I still have like a deer in the works. I plan on making a tiger and a shark, and what else is there on my list? I don't know, but I'll probably finish the last sona for that character quite before I die, probably, because I take so long for some things. But yeah, that's the process, and I love adding to this collection of characters. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, don't stress trying to find a representation of that. I played with my own way to express myself for a little bit. It was mostly like a private, low-key thing, and then I thought, you know what, it would be cool for me to have something. And then after like a little bit of inspiration, like being at the zoo, I took an idea that I was fairly okay with, and then made it into something that I really like, and that took years. So it's fine, and I think it's actually good for you to just be like dipping into everything and just being like, it would be cool if I could be this or be like that or have these traits, because eventually either you're just going to keep having fun, or you might settle into something that's more solid, and that way you can just be like, oh yeah, that's a version of me that I really, really like, and I like coming back to it.
Yeah. And I think it's so cool the way you've kind of worked in the different kind of like sonas to some degree that you've had that then are like kind of tied together into this lore of like having the shapeshifter who then kind of becomes them and having slightly different personalities. I'll say, as someone who has 3 sonas as well, pending, who knows, like there are different ways you express yourself when you're in each form, and they're all you, but like they're all different aspects of you. And I think that kind of having them have like kind of somewhat distinct personalities but still be connected is a really interesting way of kind of uniting the various personas that you may present to other people depending on the situations that you're in. Like, you might feel more comfortable, for example, in a situation being Sparks, or you might be feeling more comfortable being you in a specific situation, and having a way to kind of unite that all, and especially within the lens of shapeshifting, I think is a really interesting way to present it, because I think so much of sonas is just communicating to the community an image or profile that we want them to have at that point in time when we are interacting with that group of people.
Yeah, also for me, like the interesting thing is that I am not very decisive about what I could possibly be. So there are, yeah. So that's the thing. I really, if you were to ask me, right now what species I would want to be for the rest of my life. I couldn't find an answer, probably. And tomorrow that opinion might shift completely. And I was like, no, let's just have this variation and all of this fascination, just like tucked into one thing. And that's how I came up with that law. And also I thought about, like you can have one TF and stay whatever you turned into for the rest of your life, or you could have TFs all the time, every day, when you like it. And this is more what I prefer, because like I said, I do enjoy the process, and I wouldn't want, in my ideal world, I wouldn't want to undergo it just once, but maybe twice, 3 times, and going on indefinitely. So that was the thought behind it. And I'm starting to create a little universe around it.
Nice.
It's perfectly healthy to not want to settle on a thing when people's like, what animal do you most identify with? When are you going to pick one? Like, don't try to put yourself or others into a box, because that's what happens if you feel pressure to settle on something, which means that this is the thing I'm going to be, and that's it. And that's not fun to me. And I don't think it's really fun for a lot of people. If you end up gravitating toward that, that's fine, because you did it. I suppose that the aversion to change would be the worst thing. And like, again, really ironic. Like, yes, I am this kind of shapeshifter, but I only do these things. That's fine. Just as long as you're not resisting it, and if you don't feel like, oh, I must do this, otherwise people won't understand me or something. That's the thing about furry that can bother me sometimes. You are this thing, and this is exactly how you are and how you're meant to be and how you will be, and that kind of like labeling shit just bothers me.
Well,
the idea of being a shapeshifter is like really comforting, because yes, you do have freedom. If anything, what I like is the idea of being able to fall back on a comfort zone, but otherwise you can do whatever you want.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think this is something that a lot of TF folks actually struggle with to a degree, because, and maybe this is just the folks that I've interacted with, but like there is something interesting in all these different species that can pull us in, and it can be difficult to force us to commit in a way that I think that furries often do. Like furries are like, this is how I am. Transformation fans are like, well, this is how I could be, but I could also be that, And I feel like that indecision is something that is like so tantamount to a lot of us, especially TF fans who like have various different TF interests. Like, there's obviously some folks who are like, I'm just into like donkey TFs, and that's fine too. But I find that the ones who have like a lot of different interests have that same problem. So I'm curious then, when we think about, you've mentioned like some of the different species that you do like or could see yourself being as part of like a shape-shifting thing. What kind of traits in a species are you often the ones that really pull you in? Like, is it like thick tails or large paws or like lithe forms or bulky forms, or is there something like specific in a species that really like pulls you in, or is it like the variety of all the different traits?
Well, to all the examples you just mentioned, yes. It's kind of a process of me figuring out what I want in a specific point in time. Sometimes I just get random thoughts to my head being like, oh yeah, what if I had hooves now? What if I had a thick tail? What if I had whiskers now? And it's just like a certain body part it starts with and then expands. Mostly I think about, okay, what would I prefer at the moment? Would it be scales or fur? And then I just progress from that, and it mostly determines what I would like. And I do have a weakness for thick tails, and some species just don't have that, which is a shame, but they could have that. Also, just like not bound by species for me. There can be also many combinations of it. Which is also quite fascinating. But like in the end, I really just have a certain body part I start thinking about and maybe can't stop thinking about, and then it somehow develops into a species I'm into that day, that minute, that second, whatever.
That's so cool. I find that, like you, I say yes to all the ones I just mentioned and then some. And there's an appeal in being whatever it is that you weren't into just before. It's almost like, oh, I was just like really big on otters, for example. You know, like they have really long torsos, they look so cute, they have like nice thick tails.
Yeah,
And maybe now it's like, oh, well now, I'm really finding rhinos to be really interesting because they're like almost the opposite. Like they're massive, they're like really big and bulky, they have the massive horn. It's like completely different like locomotion style. Like you almost jump back and forth between some of the ones because it's like almost in contrast to what you were into before because you find both interesting.
yeah, it's kind of a shame you can't have it all at once,
Yeah.
but that makes it interesting, and that would make me want to change all the time if I could, and just figure it out.
Yeah. Well, so then I'm curious, are there like, you've obviously mentioned that, you feel like you're a shapeshifter. That's like the most like definitive version of you. When you're talking about like a fluid shapeshifting identity, are there any areas that you feel like will always be off like limits, or like are there any like species that you just are like, no, that's not something my identity would touch on, or like facets like, fluidity within gender sexualities, that kind of like, are there any areas there, I guess, that you find don't intersect with being like a shapeshifter from a species perspective?
Like, I'd say I can't say things for sure. I can only say
Okay.
how it is now for me.
Yeah.
And with the exception, it might change at any point in time. So I like to explore a lot, and like right now there are some aspects that I don't want to touch on, which is perfectly fine. Like thinking about species I wouldn't want to be turned into or turn into. Like the most example I give is like I don't really have particular interest of turning into a slug, for example. It might be fascinating at some point for me, but I don't really have the interest for it. And same thing goes like for gender and sexuality. I do feel for myself very comfortable as the man I am, and I don't see the need to change that for myself. So on the shape-shifting side of me, I don't have the need now. That might change, who knows? And I'd be quite open for that, to experience that. But right now, I don't have the need for it, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a really healthy way of looking at it, honestly, that, you're speaking to how you are now, and you never know where life or your interests may take you, but at least for now, you feel like pretty comfortable in that. And I think that speaks to a well-explored thought process on these topics. So I think that's always good to hear.
Yeah, it might show that I think about it a lot.
I think we all do to some degree, but I think like, there's a difference between thinking about it and also doing introspection on it. And it's clear that you've done both, which I think is healthy. And we encourage everyone to do. Introspection is very healthy. So
It is. Do it.
yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. I'm very glad that you have done this kind of inward thinking. It's especially good because when people put that kind of thought into themselves, you can really open up other people's perspectives on things. So even though I feel like from what you've talked about, you and I kind of share like certain likes on it, you did get me thinking about, well, do I enjoy these aspects? Do I want to include this into into how I like to fantasize about it? Because that's the great thing. When you're thinking about yourself, you also don't necessarily keep that to yourself. It's going to affect how you communicate with other people. And if you express these ideas, well, you don't know where you're going to bring out of them. I think it's great.
Yeah.
It is.
Awesome. Well, I do have some audience questions that I want to make sure we left time to. So the first question comes from Max Velocity with his bangers. And so Max says, it's not really possible to write a utopia that at least one person doesn't consider a dystopia. So, for example, if you believe that honest work gives meaning to living, then you might hate living in Star Trek. So my question is, what kind of utopia centered around TF would you like that most people would consider a dystopia and vice versa? I'll try to take a stab at answering this first because there's different layers to this question.
Sure, go ahead.
I think one thing that I would consider a bit of a utopia that I think most people would fall into the realm of like CTF. I think that most people, they're not really into that kind of like transformation. And I totally get why. I think a lot of people would consider it like it could be like a form of identity death, or it could be, just depressing that you're only like doing this one thing and that you don't have as much agency. To me, I think, and again, I like changing things up, so I wouldn't want this necessarily to be permanent, but I think like a quote unquote utopia that centers around people being able to do those kinds of changes, to me sounds super interesting and I'd be very happy with. But I think most people would be like horrified by that and would be like, absolutely not. I do not want this for myself. I would not want a world that was like centered around that. I guess for the reverse, though, I think one of the utopias in quotations that I've seen people like write about and talk about is one where, for example, everyone gets to undergo a change at some point in their life, and that change like reflects their inner person. And then they get to live with that change and live out their lives like being this form that's like perfect for them or whatever. To me, that screams dystopia, because like you, I would have a hard time being committed to one thing. And so to get to have a transformation, it's like, well, that is great, but there's like a dark side to it, because now that's all I'm going to ever be stuck with. And I'm never going to get to experience so many different things, especially when like I might see other people living as different forms that I might want to be. So to me, I know that is often like a quote unquote, like a TF trope or scenario world that people like really latch onto. But to me, that screams dystopia. So.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, and it's also, I find a lot of transformation scenarios pretty potentially dystopic, because I perceive that I guess if it was like a fact of life, reasonably speaking, people would figure out how to live in a society together with things like that. But knowing like only what we are, I see a lot of things going terribly wrong. I guess a utopian society that I would want to see is something where I don't know. I'm actually not sure how to answer that question, because it's so layered and my brain goes into a million different directions. I don't know. What about you, Sparks? Maybe I'll think of something after you say something too.
Well, it is a very complex question, and wow, I'm pretty overwhelmed with this myself. But like thinking about TF-related utopia, I think if for me, utopia is something where everyone is happy, and if you like would create a world which is TF focused, centered, maybe even, there will always be somebody who's not okay with the way things are, and so yeah, there can't be a like perfect utopia for me, but if it would get close to me, how I would describe it is that maybe, like you said, still in some way, that everybody would get a customize your character screen after puberty, like with unlimited tries, hopefully, just to express themselves the way they are and who they want to be. I think this is something that needs to be done in any society, like everybody can.
If I can actually just elaborate on that for a second, perhaps something that you would consider a utopia that many would consider a dystopia would be like, you have to change your form like after a certain period of time. I feel like you would actually probably enjoy that to some degree, whereas a lot of people would be like, no, I want to like stay in this one thing, don't make me change. So
yeah, true.
All right, so then I just thought of my answer.
Okay.
Which is, let the people who don't want to turn into anything be that. Which is just like, oh, okay, so what? But really, that would be great. But conceptually speaking, you will eventually have in and out groups that will begin to say, oh, those people don't want to embrace true freedom. They want to stay stuck the way they are. Those people, they are small-minded, and yes, the freedom to do something or not do something is great, except there are people who will not think so. So that is my answer, and it's a little ironic. You're gonna have the people who simply don't want to, like, I'm actually fine like this, but you'll have people who are something every day or every other day, and they may eventually look down on those kind of people.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah, I have to say this myself, like thinking about it, not wanting to change is not making a choice. Like you still have the choice to not change in that situation. And that is a very respectable choice to me as well. Because yeah, I also like my human body. I'm fine with it. Of course, sometimes it could be better. Like we all have somehow body issues at some point. I can't deny that for myself. But like in the end, people who wouldn't want to change in that situation should be allowed not to change because it's perfectly fine. And what I also think like is there could be like a separation coming in at some point, like you already mentioned, Libra, that people would be called out for not wanting to change, and this would be a complete dystopia for me. Also, some people thinking of themselves as superior to others because of their species, their transforming capabilities, or whatever, the way they look and how they can shift or whatever, and using that as an advantage to build a society on. It's just unpleasant to live in. Oh wait, yeah, that kind of happens outside in the world, I remember.
This is why at the beginning of the question, you have to realize that the frame of thinking we have is for our experiences as people, depending on where we grew up in. Because yeah, even like the region of the world that you're in is going to shape your perspective. Mine is a very particular kind, and Sparks, you're like way over there in Europe, so that is going to affect like what we think. There's plenty in common, but there's going to be like the little things, but overall, people share the same kind of experience. So that means that when I think about what's utopian, we're going to have that. And seeing how people have been throughout history, that would be the most utopian thing. Anybody can be whatever they want, or don't be. You have to respect the people that mindfully say, "I am okay like this," and leave them the fuck alone.
True words.
Completely agree. So the next question we have comes from Galen the Beaver, and Galen asks, "What is the funniest or most humorous TF you've ever seen, and what made it funny?" I don't know if anyone has an answer right off the bat. If not, I can go.
I think I do. Actually,
Okay, go for it.
I have two. Like one that jumped to my mind, and one I just stumbled upon like minutes before we started recording the podcast. Actually, which is pretty fun. The one I'm referring to first is the one I don't know the artist of. I don't know what it was about, which is sad. I tried to look it up, but I really can't find it in my head. It was a TF comic, I think 2 pages or something, of a man transforming into something like a kitsune or anything. And it came to the point where his paws burst and shifted, and which made him lose balance and just like fall backwards. And there was a frame in there of just a very expressionless face of him being like, "Oh no." And then he dropped. And I just read that, and that was such a humorous approach to TF. I really loved that. And there has also been an artwork, like the one I discovered right before the podcast. I think I still have it up somewhere, hopefully. Yeah, it's by the artist Serge. I hope Church. I hopefully pronounced you right if you listen to this. It is for a character called Lunak, and it's like a meme when a shapeshifter can't find his original form, and there's just like a dragon taking on multiple forms, and really just can't find it, being like, "Where is it?" It is very relatable to me, to be fair, and that just made me giggle a little when I saw it.
Oh, that's fantastic. How about you, Libra?
I can't think of anything like super funny, like the funniest one that sticks out. But the first one I was able to think of was it was Shantae Half Genie Hero. If you can turn into a bunch of very useful things, one of the most useful things she can turn into is just a tree in a pot. And you're like, why? She can't do anything except kind of like shake and move. But every time she does, she lets a ton of money out. And that's just really funny because you just keep turning back into a tree and you keep doing that and you just keep loading up on money, and it's so fucking broken, and you don't need to worry about money ever once you have that form. Otherwise, she can turn into the monkey, the elephant, the harpy, All those things are incredibly useful, and they're cool, and they're fun, and they're cute. One of them's even like a mouse. She looks almost like a pixel on the screen, which is really funny because then they include these little mazes inside of the side scrollers that just are really, really fun. But yeah, I was like, what the fuck is the tree for? I can't do anything. Oh, money. Never ending money. Okay.
Let me add that form to my shapeshifting collection then.
Yeah.
Also money growing on trees.
Yeah, which is always funny. Yeah, I was struggling with the funniest one. I feel like it can be hard to like remember like specific ones to some degree because I have seen like a decent amount of them. There was one that I think Toledo, friend of the podcast, did one time where it was like this guy was like had bet on a horse or something, and I think because of his bet, like he was now turning into a horse or something. But what made the situation funny was like the picture had him like sitting at like a teller booth being like annoyed with his ticket, and the teller's just like, which I thought was really funny to me. So like I don't know, that one stood out to me in my mind. There's definitely been some where it's like, oh, you like TF in a really like inconvenient situation, and then like everyone around you is like, and I don't know, like the reactions I think can be quite funny as well too. But yeah, if I had to guess, I think it was probably the Toledo one was the one that came first to mind. So I'll pick on that one, I guess.
Oh, okay. So honorable mention to Jolly Jack, who has a lot of transformations that are actually really, really funny.
Mhm.
And I'll give one example because there are way too many. It's one where these three girls go to get some kind of special ice cream, and they're supposed to turn them into like huge, like super buff cat babes. And they're all pretty good because at first they're just like, I don't think anything's happening, and it's just like, oh, here it goes, here it goes, and she's like shifting and everything, and she's like, oh, all right, it's like, ooh, that was great, right? And then the other one starts to turn, and then she's like, oh wait, oh, something's wrong, and then she's like, wait a minute, and she takes her claw and she like cuts the back of her like bikini bottom, and the tail like bursts out, and then she's like, yeah, that's better, but they only had like a few licks, and then the third one is kind of like, it's like, wait a minute, where's mine? I'm like, did you finish mine? It's like, yeah, and I ate mine too. I'm like, yeah, but nothing's happening. But then she like lets out a huge burp, and she becomes like the biggest one, and as she's changing, like her top becomes so strained that it snaps and it flies off, and it takes like a chunk out of a nearby building.
Oh my god!
It's just it becomes a lethal projectile. It's like. And it's great because at the beginning they all sign waivers, and that's reasons why.
Oh, that's so funny.
But yeah,
Yeah, lethal projectile. I think I have to incorporate this in some of my comics at some point.
Yeah.
Maybe like have something funny like the button of a shirt snapping off and shooting somebody in the face. That sounds funny.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh, amazing. So I have one more question actually, and this comes from Chozo FS, and they ask, is there a type of TF you really used to vibe with, but over time aren't as much of a fan of now?
okay. Let me answer this first because because I don't want to leave like on a bitter note, and yeah, if I'm the last one, it'll be that way. Male to female, I used to be okay with it. I used to like it. Over time, it was kind of like meh. It became very samey, and it also just started to ring as kind of sexist. And then I stumbled upon a thread in D. Yeah, 4chan. Fucking D had a thread where somebody sincerely asked, why is it better if a guy turns into a woman? Why is that better for you? And the answers were enlightening and depressing. And I was like, and by then I was kind of like not really into it anymore. But it was just like, oh my God, is that really how some people feel? That's really fucking awful. Answers like, oh yeah, you know, you don't have to worry about like all these like womanly attitudes, and you know, they just don't understand how to like be with a guy, and only guys know how to please guys, which is like also kind of like a homoerotic way of thinking that I'm sure they don't want to really engage with because they're fucking terrified of that.
Yeah. But,
You know?
Yeah.
It's and I'm just here like, Jesus, now I don't know who's doing it and why. And honestly, for the most part, you can. You can usually tell if it's at least, if it's at least self-indulgent or if it's positive or like based in, in like a trans identity and things like that. You can see the themes. People are good at communicating those, except when they don't. And I'm like, I don't like this. I really, really don't. And but like just to dial back on like the scale of depression and upsetness of that whole idea, it just became really boring because it's done so much, a lot, a lot, a lot, and and I just don't fucking care anymore. Every now and again somebody will do it and I'll just be like, oh wait, that one's good. Because for me it's a lot about the execution, but used to be okay and good and like male to female stuff, and now I'm like, ah, fuck it.
No, that's fair. How about you, Sparks?
Well, I was trying to think about something, and I really couldn't come up with something very specific because my liking into TF has been more of a progress of adding more to the things I like and not removing things I don't like anymore. If the only thing that comes close to it, and I know it's not that close really, it's I have taken a bit more interest in feral TF lately because my I think it's more interesting on how the body shifts because it's a completely new structure. But that aside, I have not that much excitement for anthro TF anymore.
Okay.
Like there still is excitement, but not as much as seeing a body shift a lot heavier, changing a lot more than just, you're growing fur, scales, a tail, and get claws, just as an example. So that is a bit more interesting to me. And if I could pinpoint it on a specific species, I think it would be dragons in my end. I have been, once I started getting into TF, once I started drawing back in the days, I really love the idea of anthro dragons. But right now that is not that exciting for me anymore. It's still exciting, but not that exciting as other subjects. That's why I designed my dragon for Sona U as a more of a in-between thing of a feral dragon and an anthro dragon. I think it turned out quite well, at least for me, and that's more interesting from my perspective.
Yeah,
because I like how I feel in how I would feel in a different body that is not the structure I'm used to.
Yeah.
No, I'm totally on board with you on that. And even if it's supposed to be like a humanoid or something like that, I want to take it a little farther, which is why I like to say that I enjoy monsters. There's got to be something like really strange about it sometimes to really get me interested or to like find a lot of attraction to it. And feral stuff is really, really good for that too. Especially since the in-between parts are really like so monstrous looking, and also puts a heavy contrast on things like building power or just like a strange new attribute, and that's really appealing.
Yeah. I guess on my end, and I am glad I went last because actually I came up with better answers as we were thinking. At first glance, I'd say a lot of avians. I was already kind of on them, and then I've just become completely uninterested in them. So that would be one. But on a more trope kind of focus, I've actually really been like turned away from like leg fusion and like a lot of merge TF in general. Actually, I used to be really into merge TF, and now it's like there's some very small specific ways in which I can enjoy it, but otherwise I'm like, no, I don't want any of this.
Really?
Yeah, I just like I mean, I'll joke that like Color Out of Space, the movie, really turned me off of Merge TF. But like broadly speaking, I've just become less and less interested in it. Like there are specific things like, I've mentioned CTF. That's technically a kind of a Merge TF, and that I'm totally fine with. But a lot of the other ones have just like kind of fallen off the map for me. And then one that actually I was quite into, and then I realized I was just into it for different reasons, and therefore I'm not actually into it. I used to be into like mpreg stuff, and like I found that kind of interesting, but I realized I just liked the bellies. I didn't actually like the pregnancy bit, so I just like chucked that away. So I don't know if that really fits, but like that was something that I found interesting that I'm like, no thank you, I don't want any of that. So
it can fit. I mean, you got stuff like male ovi shit too,
yeah,
and that
and
can
it has a time and place.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Just not really my thing anymore.
Yeah, now you see it and you're very much like, all right, moving on.
Yeah, pretty much. So,
Yeah, that's
Funny,
it. Yeah.
funny enough, well, because you mentioned you're not that much into like fusing and merging TF. Like I've been getting into it recently a lot more. I do enjoy like fusing a lot. Like having shark hybrids or something. I really enjoy that, especially in combination like with slithering or just like aquatic animals. And I've been enjoying that. And funnily enough, this is something I came back to because the first interest I had in TF was actually on my end mermaids and merfolk in general.
Yeah.
So little Sparks at the age of 3 was watching the Little Mermaid fusing her legs back together and being like, that? And I think that is what created the spark of love in TF for me.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think I still enjoy it in Snake TFs, but in most other ones, I'm just kind of like, on it now.
It's about the execution.
Yeah.
Like you talk about the legs merging and stuff, and that can be fine, but I don't find it very interesting either.
Yeah.
Well, I do find like the thought of how it would feel just like to not have your legs. It is just very exciting for me. I think the process is hard to execute, just like to show in art, because I do not like when the legs, for example, fuse at the feet first and then fuse upwards, because it's not like a natural flow of the body. And like the other way around from the hip down is very hard to like get right, and I've been struggling with it a lot.
Oh, I got suggestions for you if you like want to explore that more, but because I still love transformations into snakes. And I and not wanting to just do like the simple like sticking together the legs from like the bottom up or the top down was not enough for me. And I had people telling me, oh, that's actually the tailbone would start here, tailbone would start here, and wanting to have something that I want to look at, but also not just make it purely like about the anatomy, because people are weird about that. Fuck you, people. Just like what would look good too, and then I found a middle ground. Yeah, it's something that is really fun, but it is difficult to pull off. So it's more like the tailbone will start pushing out, widening at the base, and as it's coming down, like the idea would be for the developing like muscles and structures and everything, kind of like pulling down and like taking the legs with it. So it's kind of like the legs are being also absorbed without turning into these little things that are just whittling away into little noodles, which doesn't look good. And just like, doing something like that. I've done it a few times in my own work, and I like revisiting that because it's a really fun effect for me.
I think there's also not one correct way to approach it. Like, we are talking about infinite possibilities on how this could be pulled off, and we wouldn't know for sure how that would go. And I do love to explore like the topic of, okay, what you just described, that the tailbone is extending or that your legs are actually fusing together. It's also what you want to express in the art you're doing.
Oh, I get that. I'm just saying that. I just don't think it looks good when they're turning into when they're getting like really tiny and like
Yeah, it
vestigial.
does look a bit awkward.
And,
Yeah.
and I don't like how that looks, so I wanted to find a way to have what I want. And I don't know,
And
if I didn't already go into describing what goes into just that alone, it's not exactly an easy fix either. I'm putting more work on myself for what I want to see.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Sparks, for coming on. I was curious, actually. I don't know if you have any questions for us.
Oh wow! I've been bombarded with very good
Yeah.
questions. I've been thinking about a long time. Actually, I had a question for Libra. Where do you get your inspiration from? Because I really love looking at your art because it has some very good expressions in it, and the process behind it, how you depict it, is just amazing for me.
Oh,
And I do look up to it quite a lot. Do you get inspiration from some aspects, maybe, or something that inspires you heavily for your TF artwork?
that's a layered answer.
Sorry.
So no. I just want to organize it instead of like rambling. I suppose I get a lot of influence from just wanting to revisit certain things and then wanting to emphasize that thing. So it's why sometimes I'll keep doing like I don't know. I'll feel like Ovi again. Like, well, here's a little angle I haven't tried yet. A lot of it is like self-indulgence. Also, with anybody else that I have a relationship with, that can be very inspiring stuff because then I want to try to visualize that. The other thing that I remember you talking earlier about the want to see all kinds of features. I want to see a bunch of different things. And so I like revisiting anything that I think is. Oh yeah, that's it. So even though if like say I want to do like horse transformation stuff or something with like horse features, I think oh yeah, I like how people do the bulk, but they don't really do it like this, or they do like some uneven changes. It's all about the things I want to see that I feel are not really done very much. And thank you for saying that. Expressions are something that I do well because I feel very like wishy-washy on it. But in terms of something like that, it's part of like what you were saying with the intimacy of it. How do you think that would really feel? And anything that I've felt, physical or otherwise, I try to put into that, as well as just the fact that, for instance, I like weightlifting, so it's really good to imagine like the strain on the face with that, maybe the kind of pain that may happen in some changes, stuff like that. But I'm not sure if that's exactly the answer you were looking for, but if it's not, I can elaborate if it's like a source or something, because there are artists, of course, that I found like Ranzab was somebody like Griff and Ranzab. Ranzab had these incredibly exaggerated changes that I really, really love even now. And Griff had a way of making it always feel like there was a lot of pressure, like building up inside of the body that's just slowly like pushing its way out or wrapping you tighter. And I love the idea of that feeling. So those are like a few of the influences off the top of my head that I can think of too. There are way more, and I look at your stuff too as like a really good example of just like you put your own kind of like pressure on the body, and I really like that you're able to just make it very heavy and thick. And that sort of thing is something that I think is really good to have, and I try to get that for my stuff. So yeah, lots of things. Could talk about this for a while, but I thank you for asking for the compliments. Like super flattering, because as far as I'm concerned, like it's just the opposite. Where it's like, yeah, you're one of the people that I would look up to, because like holy fucking shit, like with the one that you did with the guy changing in class. I see that in the very first panel, which is very easy to ignore, you painted that whole thing. From reference or not, it looks like you painted it like very quickly, and you got the job done, and it's exactly what it needs to be. Because at a glance, I'm like, wow, did you take a photo? No, not quite, but like I love that kind of style. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Like you mentioned Griff before, and I have to say your art really reminds me a bit of Griff, but not quite. It's very something solid you both share in the art, and like this tightening, this pressure building up. You described that really well, and I don't know if I could have ever described it that way. If I would never have come to that wording. But yeah, this is something that is very like stable, very, very reality bound. Let's say it like that. So if I look at your artwork, I always think like this is what would probably also be very realistic to happen, and it feels very, very tight to close to reality and how it would look like, instead of being some like fantasy way of transforming. Let's call it like that. That is maybe far-fetched or would not be possible.
I would say something like smoother or softer, where I suppose you could just kind of like watch something idly happen for the most part. And that's not what I'm looking for. I really want to feel it. I want the subject to feel it. And so I look for that. I found it very primarily in those two artists. And I have been lucky enough to like speak with Griff for a good while. We haven't talked in a long time, but actually like gave me suggestions, helped me with stuff. There's a couple of like old pieces that are actually really, really old collaborations. And so I got to actually learn a few things, not just from watching, but actually gave me a little bit. So I'm always grateful for that. And I started to get really worried when people were just like, "Oh, your art is like Griff's." I'm like, "No, that guy is way too good. Please don't say that to me. I'm not living up to that anytime soon."
It's not like Griff's. Your art is not like Griff. Your art is like the way you do it. It can't be compared to anything. There might be similarities, but it's completely your own, and I love the way you do that. Also, just a little transition. Zil, I also have a little question for you that interested me. If I remember correctly, you did some photo manips, or still do, right?
Yeah.
How does that photo manip differentiate for you to regular traditional art, or just like digital art in general, something that is drawn? Because I tried to do some photo manip, and the new generative AI features of Photoshop are quite fun to experiment with on that topic. Also, have you tried out that? I know it's a lot of questions.
Yeah, no. That's totally understandable. So I would say that one of the things that I really find distinctive about photo manipulation that definitely spoke to me when I was kind of getting into it is the fact that the resemblance between the subject and the final product is just obviously going to be that much stronger, simply because you are starting with like a picture of that person. And so there are certain features that you can pull out that really speak to, in my mind at least, a sort of realism to a TF. And like, realism's a bit of a strong word, because a lot of the stuff that I do has a lot of like painting techniques involved too. So there is like kind of a fine line to some degree when it comes to digital art versus photo manipulation. But the way that I like to conceptualize it, when I'm doing a photo manipulation, I'm taking the original picture and I'm molding it like clay. Whereas like with digital art, if you were like painting on a picture, for example, like you're creating the lines all from scratch and everything. And that's not something I do. Like it's more taking what I have and then making it into something else. When it comes to AI stuff, I have like played a little bit with some of it, at least not in my art, but like, for fun on the side. Like, I'll give an example. Like, you can do really simple stuff like face swapping with AI these days, which can be kind of cool. It's like, oh, what would I look like if I had this body or whatever? I haven't really played too much with things like Midjourney or such. To be honest, the AI stuff, in terms of how it interacts with my stuff, it makes my stuff feel a little more like an endangered species, I'll be honest, just because I find that in particular, there's been a number of artists who have been using it in really interesting ways online and like incorporating it into pictures. So like, doing like kind of a quote unquote sort of photo manip approach with AI. And people can't really differentiate between that and say maybe the stuff that I do. And so when it comes to like how I think about my stuff, I have to almost like reconceptualize it to a degree of like, what is it that does make my stuff unique versus that stuff? And it's still a question that I'm grappling with, to be honest. But yeah, I haven't played around too much with it. I mean, obviously I did a little bit when it came out because I was like interested in what it could be and what it could potentially mean, but I haven't touched it in quite a long time. And I've always made a point of not incorporating that into like the artwork I do because I like that to come, just from scratch from me. So.
Yeah, like AI is a very tough topic. I don't want to go into much more detail on it because you could make 30 episodes about it. But like, yeah, it is somewhat useful, but like I know it's very, very difficult. I've been using it in my regular workplace like very often now, like almost on a daily basis. But in my artwork, I don't know if I would like to incorporate it, but it does make some like little aspects a bit easier at some point. But what would be my art in that? But yeah, like photo manip is a topic I really want to like try to get a hang of, and I've been experimenting with it a little, but I am not as comfortable to go out with it for now.
Yeah, it takes time. Sorry, go ahead.
If I may chime in on that just a bit, I think photo manipulation is a really cool thing that is very, very difficult to do well. Extremely difficult. Like writing, I think some people mistake for it being a shortcut to good art, and it's not. So I tried a couple of paint overs, which really is just like literally doing that, painting over a photograph and trying to work with the lighting and the colors and everything there. Those were incredibly difficult, but they were very satisfying because in that respect, you got to actually still change someone into something. And I think that's a better approach if you feel like you don't really know how to like do photo manipulation in a certain way, or if like you have like certain skills, you could give that a try. My friend Pessimist, she's done like a wonderful like one-off with like a rat transformation. I'll show you that in a bit because I gotta find it first. But like, for instance, I made this out of a photo. that was my second attempt. This was my first attempt. But both of those were something that I thought, hey, I want to make something out of a photo too. And it feels really good that way, especially since if you are using something like AI, and I think one of the best points that was made was we have to make sure that we keep our creative muscles strong, and AI can kind of get in the way of that. If you don't have to imagine it, well, then you don't really build that catalog in your brain.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for those questions, Sparks. I really appreciate them. And
yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you so much for
questions.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for coming on. If people are looking for you online, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me on Fur Affinity, the Sparks99, or on Twitter, the Sparks99. The other one was taken, weirdly enough. I don't know why, who's that imposter. But also, you can find me on Telegram under the same name, Sparks99. And something I just wanted to put out there, because I noticed many people are just like very shy about texting me, and I really love chatting to new people. So if you're considering saying hi, just say hi. I'm happy about it, and I don't bite. And yeah, I just love to talk with people about TF, about art, and yeah, just say hi if you want to.
Yeah. No, that's really nice of you to put out there. We've always had wonderful chats, you and I. So I can at least vouch for that too. So
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I hope you had as much fun listening as we did recording it. Again, if you'd like to support us, you can go to patreon.com/TFTuesdayPod. And also, if you have questions for us and you'd like to be featured in the questions segment, you can tweet or leave a comment and use the hashtag TFTuesdayPod on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, or Mastodon or Blue Sky. I'm watching all three now. So if you want to get through a question, there are multiple avenues to get them to us. And we always appreciate the audience questions that are shared with us. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that everyone has a wonderful week. I hope that you are staying cool if it's hot where you are, or staying warm if it's cold where you are. Maybe you need to change your form to match the seasons. Who knows? And I hope you keep an open mind and stay TFing. We'll see you all back here next week.
Yeah. See you later, everybody.
Yeah.